ahead and get started with this neighborhood preservation meeting. This is for the 2021 Landbank Report. We actually had Caitlin here last week before last, and gave the presentation, but we didn't have enough time for any additional questions or comments. So joining us today, we have Councilor Hogan, Councilor Bay, Councilor Driscoll, and I believe that's it for the counselors. And we have Caitlin from the Land Bank. So what I wanted to do, Caitlin, since you kind of gave us an overview of everything last week, but we did have to end before you got done with your presentation. So if there's anything that you wanted to add from the ending of your slides, you can add now, and then we'll just open it up for questions and discussion. You're on mute, Caitlin.
You'd think by now I'd know better.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you for the additional time and for convening this meeting. I'm also joined by some of our board members. Michael Flair is here along with Nancy Quigg. And as you know, Pat Hogan wears two hats. He's also the chairman of our Land Bank board. I did fly through our presentation last time and hit on quite a few of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention. Just wanted to kind of reemphasize that we're putting a lot of time and effort into preparing sites for infill construction, and that seems to be finally coming to fruition, which is very exciting. You may have seen recently we posted on the Land Bank's Facebook page about 6 homes that Home Headquarters is starting construction on Baker and Woodland, and those were initially 9 separate parcels that we had to go out and buy one. We took one via donation. The other 7 we got through tax foreclosure. Then we had to spend $135,000 in grant funds on demolitions to clear those sites of blighted homes, and then go do 4 re-subdivisions through the Planning Commission to get them into the right configuration for Home Headquarters to build. And that kind of work takes place kind of quietly behind the scenes, and I think a lot of people wonder, gee, what's happening with all these land bank properties that I see around the city? But we are diligently working to prepare clusters like that for new construction. Several clusters all over the city, and it's really exciting to see that it's finally paying off and that the new construction is starting, and that all of that work on boring re-subdivisions and going to the Planning Commission is actually worth it. The other thing I didn't really get to focus on last time was brownfields. In 2019, we received a grant from the EPA to do brownfield site assessments. That's testing only, not actually for remediation yet. But we've been working with the city and with OSIDA to identify and test brownfields that are particularly focused on tax delinquent ones. And that's also kind of finally starting to come to fruition. We should be getting title very soon to 900 South Ave. We've completed a phase 1 and a phase 2 environmental site assessment there, and we'll be putting that on the market and trying to get somebody to develop a gas station there based on what community feedback we've gotten. People would like to see a kind of a national chain gas station there. We're also getting some sites on South Salina Street lined up, and we're using that grant to do environmental testing at the Winkleman site on behalf of the city, which we think will be a huge economic development potential. And we use some of those funds to do testing at 200 Maple. That one's been under contract for a while. COVID kind of slowed down some of the larger real estate development projects, but we're hoping that by the end of this year, or we are anticipating that by the end of this year, that development group, which includes a former councilor Matt Rayo, that they'll be taking title and starting renovation of that large industrial building on the east side. And we've been able to help that project along, spending a significant portion of our grant on phase 1 and a phase 2 environmental assessment there that helped them determine that they were eligible to get into the state's brownfield tax credit, brownfield cleanup program. So that's all working the way it's supposed to finally. We should be on track to spend 70% of that grant by the end, 70% of that grant should be spent by October, which will mean that we're eligible to go back and apply for another one. And some of these sites, we may determine by then that some of these sites warrant also applying for the brownfield cleanup program. That application also opens in October. So we're chipping away at the list of potentially contaminated or likely contaminated sites that are on the seizable list. For many years, we weren't really able to do much about those, but I'm glad to say that that has changed. And then the only other thing that I wanted to emphasize with you guys is just kind of the way the land bank is financed. You know, us being here, taking foreclosed properties has made the city a much better collector of your delinquent receivables. That has benefited the city since they started aggressively going after tax delinquent properties in 2012. All of the properties we've sold are now back on the tax rolls, generating about $1.6 million a year in local property taxes. And the properties that are in our inventory are ones that codes used to have to go out and cite them and then do cut and cleans and board those up. And we do all that work at a much lower cost than the city used to. So we're helping you with cost avoidance there. And all of those benefits generated by the land bank roll back to the city. They don't hit our books. The only benefit that we capture and retain is the sales revenue. So we generated about $1 million in sales revenue last year, but we ran an $850,000 deficit because we just don't generate enough to keep the land bank functioning. So we rely on the city and the county for help in that regard. We've gotten grants from the state over the years, but they want to fund specific deliverables that happen within a grant period, whether it's a renovation or a demolition. And we're grateful for those state dollars, and it helps us achieve our mission, but it doesn't cover the things that drive our deficit, which are primarily liability insurance and property maintenance. So lawn mowing, we spent over $500,000 last year just picking up trash. We have a lot of illegal dumping on our properties and in the buildings as well. So we spent about half of that was cleaning out buildings prior to listing them. So that the deficit is growing. It's a source of anxiety for us. And the land bank has been spending down our fund balance over the past few years. In past years, councilors have expressed concern, why do we need cash from the city if we've got this big fund balance? But if we keep going the way we have in terms of property maintenance, we're on track to run out of cash by the end of September. And then we won't have a plan for continued lawn mowing or trash pickup or snow shoveling. And that's, including projected sales revenues from this year. So in our recent letter that we did send to the mayor asking to be included in the upcoming budget, we asked for assistance to cover property maintenance expenses. And for the past 3 years in a row, the city's provided $250,000 to help cover property maintenance expenses, which is a big help. And had we not gotten that money last year, our deficit would have been over $1 million. So it's a big help, but it's not enough to shrink our deficit to zero. And so we did ask for $750,000 to cover maintenance expenses in this upcoming budget so that the land bank can remain solvent through the end of your next fiscal year, June 30th, 2022. And with that,
Okay.
I'll turn it over to questions.
Okay, I do have a few questions. First, I know you talked about the brownfields, and I know you aren't getting any funding for remediation, but how likely is that for you guys to be able to either apply for a grant for remediation or just to be able to have access to funds for that?
We feel pretty optimistic about it. Every October, the EPA opens up their funding applications, and we'll be eligible to apply for additional testing dollars, another brownfield assessment grant. And if we need it, we could apply at that point for cleanup dollars as well. So far, we haven't needed it with the sites that the city has conveyed to us. So for 900 South Ave, we do suspect that there are still some tanks in the ground, but we don't think it's so bad that we need to intervene. We think we can find a developer that would be willing to clean those up as part of the process of developing a new gas station. So as we go forward and continue to test sites, if we identify any contamination that's so extensive that the private market cannot or will not address it, that's when we would go apply for that kind of grant.
Okay. And then, so I'm looking on the report that you sent over to us. So I'm on page 14. I was just interested to know what the Neighbors for Neighbors line is.
14, here we go. That was a grant that came through Enterprise Community Partners. Unfortunately, that's all been spent down and it will not be reopening, so we can't go apply for more. But we renovated 3 houses over several years with that money. 315 Kirk Ave, I'm sorry, right next to the park. 304 West Beard and 1800 Lodi. And most of those were finished in previous years, but 1800 Lodi was finished in late 2020, and it just turned out fantastic. It was a 3-unit building. It was in really dilapidated condition, and it was about a $400,000 rehab. And the way the grant is set up, it would provide $100,000 of subsidy per unit, but no more than 80% of the total project cost. So in this case, it covered about 75% of the total project cost, and our buyer, Lou Vinciguerra, covered the other 25%. And now he'll be obligated to operate those 3 units as affordable apartments for 20 years in exchange for that subsidy.
Okay, but this is not something that's available like on a yearly basis.
Oh, unfortunately not. It was kind of
Okay.
leftover money from one of the previous mortgage, one of the previous bank settlements.
Okay, got you. And then I think, let me see if it's on the same page. The rental income line, you guys receive $30,450. This is for the people that are currently living in the homes, but are they going to be ongoing tenants, or is this where they have the opportunity to purchase the house from you guys?
Yeah, we really don't want to be in the business of being landlords. And so generally speaking, if we have somebody who's in a lease arrangement like this, it's either because they're working towards getting mortgage qualified and they plan to buy from us, or they have some extenuating circumstance and they just need a little time before they can relocate. We've had some cases in the past where an owner occupant is in the house at the time of foreclosure and they just want to keep their kids there through the end of the school year. So we'll enter into a lease with them for some shorter period of time like that. In this case right now, the only tenants we have are people that are working towards getting mortgage qualified.
Okay. And on the subject of relocation, so the line, the relocation assistance expense, so that was $26,000. So that's money that you guys use to move these people out of the homes, or?
Yep, we contract with Catholic Charities for that. So
Okay,
some
that's
of
what
that,
that was gonna be my next question about Catholic Charities. Okay.
our contract with them covers some staff time and some direct cash assistance, but all of it goes to Catholic Charities and then they would dole it out to tenants that they're helping to relocate. They would help them with first and last month's rent, security deposits, sometimes with actual moving expenses. Catholic Charities has a box truck, they'll come help them move. But it's also paying for case managers' time.
Okay. All right. Any other any questions or comments from the other counselors?
Yeah, Councilor Allen, if I could, when I play a little devil's advocate here, Caitlin, when I think back to the establishment of the land bank, and we've talked about this before in the past, certainly recently, I wonder how we calculated back then, after 3 years, the land bank was supposed to be self-sustaining. I'm trying to figure out how do we come to that determination, whether we factored in cost of the parcels, the structures, whether we factored in the deterioration and of course the decrease in value of parcels because of deterioration, whether we factored in how fast we had to actually move properties, for example, on average per year to meet that kind of marker. And I don't know that any of that could be answered at this moment. It's just the things I've been thinking about, Caitlin. One question, yeah, and I wonder, maybe Nader, maybe Ms. Otter, I don't, maybe we fell asleep at the wheel a little bit. What about SORA as a source of the 750,000?
If they're willing to give it to us, I would take it.
Deputy Mayor, what do you got?
I didn't know that was an option.
I'm throwing it out there.
Me either.
I mean, well, it's essentially, it's there for neighborhood revitalization. I mean, that's how it came into play. And so, when I look at it as a component of the city, if you will, or an extension of sorts that has revenue, why not use it for what it's for? If we have it there, just I throw that more so to the administration than you, Caitlin. But just when we think about where we could find money from and that kind of thing, I wonder if that's been considered or if it can be considered. So.
And just for the record, as we look at how we're going to move forward with the stimulus, housing and neighborhood revitalization is absolutely a priority. And we're going to be gathering together our our neighborhood revitalization partners, and that includes the land bank and the discussion about how they can play a role in this going forward too. So, but to your point about revisiting the nexus and the for the stability of the land bank, I mean, it's a good question, and we need to revisit that conversation again.
Yeah, I just look at Sora and its intent, even CITA and its intent. We understand that we have, some money coming in, but if we have, missions or agencies, if you will, city supported or sustained agencies that exist for those purposes and they have funds, then, it seems that it would be logical to give consideration to those as potential sources, and of course allows us to do a lot more with money that is coming from DC. It allows us to stretch our dollar a little more and cover some other things. So just something for consideration. I don't think it's in any way a bad idea. In fact, I think it's a pretty smart one. Not because I said it either, Deputy, but I think, it's just something we should give consideration to.
Counselor Allen, can I weigh in?
Who was that?
Nader.
Oh, hey, Nader.
Hi,
Okay, go ahead.
everybody. So I'm sure Caitlin is sitting there with bated breath waiting for me to respond. I was the originator of the formula that was originally drafted for the funding mechanism. And we definitely would have to have another meeting if I started to walk you all through it. So Councilor Bay, I can provide, I think I still have some of my records and drafts of how I came up with the formula and how I thought it could be self-sustaining. And what I felt was at the time, what the city's responsibility was, which I might add, we far exceeded the original floor of the amount of money that would be given. But it's a valid question, and when I go home, I'll try to look over the weekend for some of my records and information and be able to provide that to Councilor Allen and yourself and others. I can revisit probably a bunch of my emails and things of that nature, which will give you a perspective of what we were looking at the time. And I'm sure since I've been termed out from the council in terms of my awareness of the funding of the land bank at this point in time, I don't have obviously that information, but historical, I'm sure I have it.
I appreciate that, Auditor. And obviously, we know that. I think the value of the land bank in this effort can't be understated, but we certainly have to give consideration to our approaches to funding. If self-sustainability is not something that can be achieved, then we certainly have to come up with a way that so where the land bank doesn't at some point become unsustainable itself. It becomes a big financial issue for the city.
I would so much context to give. I don't want to run over our time, but I would just point out that there's about 200 land banks across the country right now, and really none of them have achieved financial self-sufficiency. And I think it's a function of the work that we're asked to do. We're addressing market failure and cleaning up messes that the private sector isn't willing or able to do. So if the private sector was willing or able to do it, then it could be a financially self-sustaining endeavor and you wouldn't need a land bank. So it's kind of a function of the public service that we provide that we shouldn't really be able to be self-sufficient, or then we'd be making enough money to where you wouldn't need a land bank in the first place.
Well, we understand that, Caitlin, but that's not the discussion when this thing came. And I speak specifically because I will reiterate the fact that I stalled this legislation for 3 months behind the very kind of concerns we're dealing with today.
Yeah.
So
we made some assumptions back then that I think you were asking about earlier. We thought that the city would be totally caught up with the backlog of seizable properties within a 3-year period. And now here we are 9 years in, and we're still not caught up with the backlog of seizable properties. So the the ramping up and then the ramping down process, instead of being compressed to 3 years, is being stretched out way beyond 9. And I think that's part of the issue. I'm also really optimistic about this Resurgent Neighborhoods Initiative. As we ramp up and convey great numbers of properties to Home Headquarters and Housing Visions and Jubilee for them to build on, that will take hundreds of properties out of our inventory and significantly reduce our annual operating expenses. And those will be going back on the tax rolls.
And let me also say, I happened to see Representative Ocasio-Cortez last night on Rachel Maddow, and she said that the 2.25 proposal that Biden is putting forward for infrastructure purposes, she felt that it should be 10 trillion, excuse me, because the housing crisis in this country is very acute. And as Deputy Mayor just said, that the city is going to continue to look at that. I know that's been a priority. Caitlin's right in terms of the expectation, perhaps, of the land bank locally. I can't speak for others. Was probably too ambitious, given the severity of the situation and the reality of the situation. But I do believe that because our community is small enough, and because there are people who still want to live in the city, there are, in our school districts, graduation rates are better and so on and so forth. There's a lot of potential for us. And certainly, given what's going on at the Skyline and other places, the need is so severe for good housing for our community. So with leadership, with some maybe federal dollars and state dollars, I think we can see where the land bank locally could be in a better financial position. And as Caitlin can address, the county, I'm sorry, but the county has not stepped up to the degree that they should have. Syracuse is still in the county. Last time I checked, maybe I'm a little old and don't remember where Syracuse is in Onondaga County. But I think our county executive spoke last night, and perhaps we need to get to them as well. So, but Councilor Bate, your point's well taken.
Yeah,
Initially,
let's be
I
clear.
wonder if
I already knew that the ideas early on was presumptuous. That was my point to begin with.
Right.
But what I'm saying is we have to give consideration to some other potential funding sources. That is the point of my discussion. It doesn't matter how much we talk about what's wrong and what we got wrong. There's a possibility that if we don't figure something out, as you stated, Caitlin, the land bank will no longer be sustainable, and we want it to be.
it's
So
an
this is why
excellent point.
some of these other sources have to be considered. I don't believe we really have a choice to not consider them. We won't get $126 million windfall from the federal government every year, every 2 years. So we have to make that 126 million stretch. We can't spend it all in one place.
We have been proposing something for a couple of years now, and we really haven't been able to make it take root. But in 2019, there was home rule legislation submitted to increase the real estate transfer tax in Onondaga County. And Senator May and Assemblyman Magdarelli submitted that for us in Albany, and we had it on the county legislature's agenda for them to consider a local increase in real estate transfer tax that would create an annual pot of money to fill this deficit. And as you might imagine, there was some difficulty negotiating that between all the parties. You know, we've got to get the Senate, the Assembly, and the county ledge to all agree on the language of the legislation, and it kind of fell apart. But I think that might be something to revisit. But something like that is recurring and sustainable would be the goal.
It fell apart because the county legislature and the county got greedy. Come on.
Well, I won't comment on
I'll
why.
say that.
Counselor-
I'm not ashamed to say that. That's what happened. And to this point about sustainability, you know, again, Syracuse is in Onondaga County. Come on.
I appreciate
All right,
what you
Counselor
said.
Hogan and President Hudson, they have questions. So Counselor Hogan and then President Hudson.
Councilor Allen, thank you. Before we got any further in our geography lesson about where Syracuse is, I would like to
Just want to make sure you knew.
Well, thank you very much. You did go to a parochial school for a long time, so I understand that you're good in geography. I just wanted to sort of pipe in. I originally, of course, as everybody knows, was skeptical about the land bank for the very reasons Councilor Bay mentioned. And I think it's sort of unfair, a little bit unfair the way I look back at it, because it was, obviously, it was new and it was promoted by a former administration that wasn't always right on a lot of things. But I'm looking right now at that 1800 Lodi Street, which is in the second council district, which was a mess for years and years and years. And I go back far enough to remember about what properties like that were before, how you would deal with them before the land bank existed. In other words, we didn't deal with them. They just sat there. And the city councilors would get calls about those places. And we couldn't do anything about them because of the city's reluctance to take any kind of action on them. Former Councilor Maroon mentioned about the abrogation of responsibility. Well, what it was a total abrogation of responsibility that the city had towards abandoned, forlorn, dilapidated properties. Until the land bank came along and started to, as a vehicle to address these, we had no solution. And whether we thought, and many of us were skeptical about the land bank making money or being self-sustaining, the simple fact of the matter is there's 1,000 properties on the tax rolls now that weren't on the tax rolls back in 2012 because of the land bank, producing revenue for the city of Syracuse. And the land bank is sort of like, left out a little bit in the cold because they produce all this revenue, the $16.7 million that we've realized. I agree with Councilor Bay. I think we should aggressively look at our finances and what's coming in as far as the American Rescue Plan and maybe SURA, maybe even CITA transferring money to SURA to fully fund the land bank, because I think this is the most efficient vehicle we have to address not only housing needs in the neighborhood, but the stabilization of our neighborhoods. And like I said, I was originally a skeptic, and now I'm a big fan. I got 3 former land bank houses on my block right now, and one going up. It makes a huge, huge difference, as we all know. So that's all I got. Thanks, Councilor Allen.
Thank you, Councilor Hogan. President Hudson.
Thank you, Councilor Allen. And I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Councilor Hogan said when you talk about stabilization. Councilor Allen asked about the 26,000 and was that for relocation and helping people move. Kate, and I'm going to ask that you do this because I'm getting calls and it starts to, and Michael Collins. Would you, Caitlin, connect with Michael Collins and have a conversation about the money going to Catholic charities to move people? Because I shouldn't have to make a call after a constituent is told there is no funding. And then I make a call and things change. It shouldn't be that way. So I'm going to need people to get together on this and figure out how to get the constituents the service that they need.
Certainly. Was somebody in a land bank house being told that there was no funding?
It's a house that land bank wants, and I think we'll talk about it offline because I think you might want to help move it and get it out the way.
Gotcha. That's sometimes the problem is that our funding is only available for land bank owned properties, and they may be, having that challenge until it comes into the land bank. There aren't the resources there. Well, I'll definitely.
I heard you mention Catholic charities, and so it has to be a little more flexibility with Catholic charities, especially when we know there's going to be an issue with it. There needs to be more flexibility.
I'll definitely connect with Mike on that.
President Hudson, this is Michael, Caitlin and I will connect on that today. I do want to point out, as we've been dealing with issues as I've come into this role over the past year, whenever we've got an issue in a neighborhood and there's dumping or anything like that, the land bank responds in ways for which no other owner of a vacant property does. And that means a lot around the quality of life. They're consistently on top of everything that we ask them to do immediately. And so simply them having control of these properties from that time between when we're able to get it into their hands until they're able to do something productive with it to get it back on the tax rolls is a game changer for the neighborhoods. And that's something that I want to call out. That's all.
I understand that, and Michael, and I appreciate your help. But again, when we're talking about the human capital, we have to be a little more flexible on how we deal with folks too, especially when we're talking about taking property away from them.
Could completely agree with you, President.
I just want to take a second and revisit something that Nader Maroon mentioned about the federal dollars that are likely coming. It's not just this American Rescue Plan money that you guys currently have or is already committed. We're expecting an awful lot of money to be in the upcoming infrastructure package for housing. And this is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really transform our neighborhoods. And we're dealing with blight and abandonment that has been building up since the 1950s. And we've been throwing a very small amount of resources at it each year trying to fix the problem, but it's never been enough. And I'm really optimistic that in some of this coming federal legislation, it will be matched to the scale of the problem, and we can really transform our neighborhoods and catch up with some of this backlog that's been building since the 1950s, if not earlier. In my slide presentation, you'll notice towards the very end, there was a slide on some federal legislation that the Land Bank Association is lobbying for. The mayor has sent letters to our congressmen and senators advocating for those bills. But if the Common Council was also inclined to express your support, particularly for HR 816, which is the Restoring Communities Left Behind Act, we're really trying hard to get that included in the upcoming infrastructure package. That would include an awful lot of flexible money for neighborhood revitalization, obviously in Syracuse and all over the country. We think it could be a game changer.
Okay. All righty. Thank you, Caitlin. We are about a minute over, but does anyone have any last questions? No? All righty. Well, thank you, Caitlin, and everybody else that joined her on behalf of the Land Bank. And now we will transition right into our Neighborhood Preservation Committee meeting. And it's a natural flow because we're gonna jump right into